Why hasn't China helped Russia defeat Ukraine so far? Everyone knows that a special operation has been going on for almost 2 years, where Russia is at war with Ukraine, but here's the question: why has Russia's closest friend, China, still not helped his friend defeat Ukraine? In this video, I will give you a detailed answer, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We should start with basic information. The Chinese army consists of more than 2 million soldiers. They have about 5,500 tanks and 3,200 aircraft units. China is considered a strong country in terms of army and military training. Separately, it is worth noting the production of equipment for the Navy, and it is the pace. In a short time, the more, the better. But the most important thing in modern wars is the UAV. They are highly effective, and this is China's specialty and feature. Since the beginning of the SVO, a whole culture of cancellation has descended on Russia. All social networks have started blocking any content that would speak a different opinion. An entire information war was waged against a country. All this happened with all Western social networks, except for one: TikTok. This is just an example to understand that China is not just not a friend to Russia, but also a hypothetical opponent. After all, not much time has passed when the Soviet Union considered the West to be the main enemy, but it was preparing for war with China. The most tense border, modern equipment and the best personnel stood precisely on the border with China. Speaking of seriousness, it can be noted that in the Far East, tanks from hangars had to knock out gates when leaving, so as not to waste extra time and come to a combat position. But not much time has passed since that moment. Of course, time is passing, and now Russia is no longer an enemy for them. But the United States is not an even greater enemy. That is why they do not help Russia, because they do not see benefits in this. They have already received everything they could get from Russia, almost free gas and coal, and other raw materials. They really buy oil after their own because it is part of their assistance to Russia. But these are not the volumes that would help to fight on the battlefield. All Chinese business is connected with the collective West, and this is the main reason why they are the richest. At the same time, intellectual property is still in the West. China does not provide material support to Russia in its conflict with Ukraine, and Beijing's partnership with Moscow is not an alliance. The development of Sino-Russian relations is a partnership, not an alliance. It is not aimed at third parties, said Wei Feng, China's defense minister. According to the head of the Chinese Defense Ministry, Beijing would like military operations in Ukraine to end. However, the Chinese authorities do not consider sanctions pressure on Russia to be an effective tool for resolving the crisis. The Chinese minister chose a much less peaceful rhetoric when discussing Taiwan at the summit. He said that the new Indo-Pacific strategy adopted by the US government is directed against a single country. He also said that if Taiwan declared independence from China, it would be a path to death. China is not a military ally of Russia, according to Russian military and political figure Igor Strelkov. It seems that China morally supports Russia. But China, judging by what Strelkov sees in the media, has done nothing to help Russia conduct this special military operation in practical terms. It only remained to wait. The Chinese beast is already unhurried, and here the geopolitical situation is changing right before our eyes. In addition, China was still in a semi-frozen state. The unfortunate COVID pandemic was to blame. The lockdown was lifted from Shanghai's 26 million people only in June 2022. There is no time for sudden movements. To this day, it is unclear whether this actually happened. Although it does not matter, the main thing is that the United States and its partners sharply stated that such military assistance would be the biggest trouble for China. Both Russia and China immediately began to deny everything. China will not, contrary to its interests, support Russia in its confrontation with the West. An Israeli expert, Yaakov Kedmi, made a corresponding statement. Although China perceives the Russian Federation as one of the components of its power in a personal confrontation against the United States, Beijing's support will remain at the same level. China is only ready to partially support the Russian side, since not all of this country's plans coincide with Russian interests. It is also worth remembering that the Chinese economy is tightly connected with Western countries, and Beijing will not sacrifice its own well-being. In this regard, we should not expect more active support from China in relation to Russia. Currently, the most sanctions in the world have been imposed against Russia. China is also under sanctions, and in addition, the United States has imposed heavy duties against it. Why doesn't China go against the West, violate anti-Russian sanctions, and launch a special operation to annex Taiwan right now? Building a multipolar world together? China does not set itself the task of political hegemony. The USA and the USSR set themselves this task. They wanted to completely take over the planet so that only one superpower remained. The goal of the Eastern neighbor is not to build a unipolar world in which China will be the main one. And there never was. Ancient China was built not on military might, but on completely different principles. The Chinese Empire put agriculture, crafts and trade at the forefront. The Great Silk Road connected China with Europe 2,000 years ago. Chinese goods were moving west along it. The Chinese expansion was predominantly commercial. In China, there was not even a class of warriors who would have a privileged status. There were no horsemen and knights there. But there were officials, philosophers, courtiers. Here they had an honorary status. And even Chinese culture was brought to Korea and Japan by merchants and philosophers. These countries have not been conquered. This is the difference between the Chinese and their Mongol neighbors. Moreover, China even decided to isolate itself from the outside world under the Ming dynasty. Later, this policy was continued by Qin. It was thus that China missed the beginning of the technological revolution that took place in the world and was greatly weakened. The 19th century is called the century of shame there. At the same time, the territory of China has grown during the isolation. How? The Manchu Qing dynasty, in addition to China, also conquered Mongolia, Tibet and Xinjiang, thus making Greater China. Subsequently, some lands fell off. Thus, even the expansion of the Chinese country was carried out by non-Chinese forces. In the 20th century, the Chinese had to participate in a very difficult war with the Japanese. After its end, the communists seized power. They professed the ideology of world domination. Very quickly, China found itself in conflict with the USSR and a new isolation. There was even a shootout between the countries, but it did not come to a new war. And the USSR, which was isolated, degraded and disintegrated. Part of China's pact with the West was the return of Hong Kong and Macau to the Chinese state. These events took place in the late 1990s and served as the basis for continued modernization. At that time, China pursued a policy of neutrality. As for Taiwan? The accession of Taiwan is quite possible. But this is an economic issue, more than a political one. Chinese economic growth is running out of steam. Labor has become expensive, investment has fallen. Cheap countries are now Vietnam and India. Americans do not allow to occupy a high-tech niche. Taiwan, as the center of the semiconductor industry, can extend economic growth for 10 years. That's why he's the target. It is not out of a desire to unite all Chinese under one state. The Chinese leadership is primarily interested in salary growth and technology development. Politics is of little. I tried to provide you with the most useful and detailed information regarding China's assistance in the war between Russia and Ukraine, and I hope you liked everything. Subscribe to my YouTube channel and like this video, new videos every 2 days.